The year is 2001 and Nintendo just released their newest console, the GameCube. The GameCube was meant to compete with the PS2 and the original Xbox, but it was a complete financial failure for Nintendo. Not only did it fail to beat Nintendo's previous console, the N64, in sales, but it also sold less than the Xbox and was completely demolished by the PS2. To be fair, the PS2 is the best-selling console of all time, since Sony keeps finding new sales numbers for it under their drawer like they're playing blueprints. But still, it was clear that a change was needed at Nintendo. So a decision was made. Nintendo would compete by not competing. Let me explain. Nintendo knew they couldn't compete with the other two consoles on a graphical level. But what it would lose in graphical fidelity, Nintendo would make up in creativity and gimmicks. Nintendo loves its gimmicks. From the Virtua Boy all the way to the Labo, Nintendo can't stop trying new ideas out. And the Wii was Nintendo's greatest gimmick. The Wii wasn't sold on graphical fidelity or super quick loading times, but on f***ing motion controls. Everyone, and I mean everyone, even non-gamers, had to get their hands on a Wii. You didn't need all those fiddly buttons to play it, just move your hand around and you're right there playing tennis, bowling, and babysitting. The Wii was a massive success, and I feel like all Nintendo had to do at this point was make a Wii 2 that was simply more powerful. But Nintendo hates making money the easy way, and so instead we got the Wii U. The Wii U, besides being the sound an ambulance makes, is probably the only console in recent memory to have less games than the PS5. It also came with a tablet that didn't work if you were standing more than 15 feet away from the TV. The Wii U barely sold. It was a huge financial blow for Nintendo, which forced them to rapidly abandon the Wii U and work on their next console. But Nintendo didn't want to make just another home console. They wanted to make a hybrid one. One that would combine the DS's portability along with Nintendo's home console power. And the basis for this console would be the Wii U's silly tablet. The Nintendo Switch would launch on March 3rd, 2017, just 4.5 years after the Wii U's release. The Switch, surprisingly, was not the first hybrid console. A few companies took a crack at the concept in the early 90s with consoles like the Turbo Express and the Sega Nomad, but none of them were financial successes. The Switch may not be the first, but it's definitely the only successful hybrid console up to that point in time. I mean, look at how portable it is. You can take it to so many places, like your chair, your couch, and even your bed. The Switch was a massive success, and when all is said and done, it might just become the best-selling console of all time. But in hindsight, it also had an abundance of flaws that were a natural result of how quickly it had to be produced. So join me as we take a look back as to why the Switch is a flawed masterpiece. So the first thing you'll notice when unboxing the Switch is this unassuming tablet. I'll turn it on in a bit, but first I need to charge it. The Switch's dock is very cheap and flimsy. I even managed to accidentally break its back cover. And if that wasn't enough, it doesn't even have an Ethernet port. I may or may not have found out about that the hard way when trying to capture gameplay footage for the video. Putting the Switch in, it originally didn't feel right. There's no satisfying click or sound to let you know that you've done it. While part of it is definitely cheap manufacturing, it's also really easy to dock and undock your Switch. Even now, it's quite novel to be able to play in handheld mode, dock the Switch, and within 10 seconds, you're playing on the TV. The original Switch stand, however, is terrible. You get this thin piece of plastic that I always felt was one slight push away from breaking. Newer Switch models did upgrade the stand, making it a lot sturdier. Onto the Joy-Cons, they were probably my least favorite controllers of the newer gen consoles. I love their flexibility, you can use them separately, you can combine them to make a makeshift controller, you can attach them to your Switch for handheld mode, and you can use each of them on their own. For that flexibility though, some sacrifices had to be made. The Joy-Cons have really small and plasticky buttons. They're not really satisfying to press. They're also very close to one another. Look at how much more space you have on a PS5 or an Xbox controller. And I know what you're saying. Besides the flexibility I talked about earlier, the reason why the buttons are so cramped is portability. Nintendo expected you to take this beefy thing with you outside. I think they even expected you to put it in your pocket, and no. And not only is this console still pretty big, it also sticks out like a sore thumb. A DS or a PSP are a bit more easy to pass by unnoticed in public, but the Switch is big and colorful. It looks great, but I wouldn't want to take it outside. And another thing I don't see mentioned enough, I feel like it's too expensive to be portable. It didn't sit right with me to take that risk. And don't get me wrong, I loved the Switch's portability, just the ability to play in bed made the entire console's concept well worth it for me. And you can tell these controllers were made in Tokyo, because they were drifting. Joy-Con drift was a massive problem for the Switch throughout its lifetime. You can find hundreds of articles discussing it or how to fix it yourself. I got my Switch in 2019 and somehow my controllers never had the issue. I don't know if I got some special adamantium laced Joy-Cons, but they've been going strong for over 6 years now. This is doubly surprising to me because I've probably burned through 8 PS4 and 5 controllers. But enough about the console itself. The first thing you'll notice when you turn on the Switch is the screen. It's not really bright, probably quite appropriate for Doom the Dark Ages. Despite the low brightness, it's not that noticeable when playing games. Nintendo games are so colorful that they do offset the low brightness a bit. But if for some reason you decide to watch YouTube or something similar on this thing, that's when brightness really becomes noticeable. Last thing before we talk about the actual games is the GameShop. I usually wouldn't talk about any console store page, but this is so bad. You'd expect that the page where the company is making a lot of their money from would be working flawlessly, but no. It's slow, unresponsive, and filled to the brim with shovelware. I even bought one of them out of curiosity because I had some leftover store credits. Ding Dong XL. Yeah, 10 out of 10 game. Possibly the worst store experience ever since the PS3 had you typing out each word letter by letter. Anyways, it doesn't really matter how good of a base a console has if it doesn't have any games. The Switch's games can be split into 3 categories: first-party Nintendo games, third-party AAA games, and indie games. And each of them tells a different story about what the Switch was and what it wasn't. As per usual, the first-party games were the Switch's main selling point. And what a lineup it was! You had Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Mario Odyssey and Wonder, Animal Crossing, Pikmin 4, Mario Kart 8, Metroid Dread, and many others, all exclusive to the console. And I know Breath of the Wild was also available for the Wii U, but so few people got the console that it might as well be considered a Switch exclusive. And the bigger games were supported by other smaller scope titles and remasters that were also a lot of fun. It was the Switch's first party lineup that got me interested in the console in the first place, and especially the rave reviews both Odyssey and Breath of the Wild were getting. I liked Breath of the Wild. I didn't love it as much as other people did, but it's still a really good game. It was Odyssey that blew me away. The sheer depth of the mechanics, the wide variety of things you could do, and even the whole atmosphere. Mario Odyssey is probably my favorite platformer of all time. I could sit here for hours and talk about Nintendo's first party lineup, but it's outside this video's scope. All in all, it was a very strong lineup. There were obviously some misses along the way too. Paper Mario and the Origami King was miserably boring, but all in all, Nintendo published the exact games needed to make the console relevant. And indie games were also a big part of the console. The majority of indie games rely on a strong, repeatable gameplay loop. Think Hades, Dead Cells, or Katana Zero. That made the Switch the console to play them on. Just the ability to turn the game on in handheld mode, do a run in Hades for example, whenever and wherever you wanted to, made indie games and the Switch a perfect match. Finally, we have the AAA games. I mean, they ran, barely, but they ran. A lot of AAA games made it over to the Switch, but almost always they were the definitive worst way to play them. Look, if you wanted AAA games, you were not getting a Switch. Like, yeah, technically you could play The Witcher 3 on it, and it's impressive that you could even do it, but it would be worse than any of the home console versions. Even Persona 5 Strikers, which is more of a AA game, had loading screens so long, I thought GTA 6 would be out before I was done with them. Sports games were especially egregious with the Switch. We got one WWE game that didn't even work, EA just resorted to publishing the same game over and over with just kit and transfer changes. No, seriously, I know people say that about FIFA all the time, but it was actually the case with the Switch, and the NBA 2K games were just ghost towns. Even without the AAA games, the Switch still has a really strong game library. They did give up at some point though. After Tears of the Kingdom's release in late 2023, Nintendo kinda gave up. We only got filler games for almost 2 years and the Switch has generally limped towards the release of the Switch 2. Kinda odd considering we were getting GTA 5 a month before the PS4's release and The Last of Us only a few months beforehand. Having the Switch's swan song be a year and a half before the Switch 2 came out was definitely poor planning on Nintendo's part. Due to the Switch being the first successful hybrid console, it spawned a lot of competitors. And while Sony and Microsoft are tentatively now dipping their toes on this market 8 years after the Switch's release, it was actually Valve that took a massive leap and released their own handheld console. Since I mostly used the Switch in handheld mode, the Steam Deck immediately took its place when it launched. It's a lot larger, it had the much bigger buttons, and it had a gigantic library spanning decades upon decades of video games. A lot of people online have asked the question of why they would need a Switch 2 if the deck exists. And for them, it's possibly true, but we have to understand that despite their similarities, these consoles are not in any way, shape or form in competition. The Switch is on track to be the best-selling console of all time, while the deck sold 3 million units. The main difference I believe is accessibility. Any game you have on the Switch, you have a 100% guarantee that it's going to run right out of the box. On the deck, while the library might be bigger, whether games run or not depends on you fiddling with settings, if the game is even compatible in the first place. Not to mention messing with graphics settings for optimal battery life. The Steam Deck is a very niche console and I think it's very far from the Switch, even if it's better in a lot of aspects. I've been quite critical of the Switch so far and you may think I hate it. It's the opposite actually, I really like the console. A lot of the complaints I have with it are after 8 years of hindsight. It's very clear that the console was rust, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter that the dock was flimsy or the buttons were plasticky. It didn't matter that the screen was dim or that Nintendo straight up gave up after Tears of the Kingdom. Because at the end of the day, the Switch changed how we play games. It changed how we view handheld consoles in general. You can't release an underpowered handheld console anymore. Your console needs to run high quality fully fledged games or it shouldn't release at all. I don't think we'll see another DS or another PSP, at least not in their old form. And it's all because of the Switch. The Switch is somehow greater than the sum of its parts. It has a boatload of flaws, but its influence on gaming, the mechanical brilliance of its games, and the actual usefulness of its gimmick make the Switch an excellent console. Thank you for watching this video. If all goes well with the pre-order, I'll be having a lot of Switch 2 content on the channel when it comes out, so subscribe for that if you're interested. Until then, you can click here to watch my review of Doom: The Dark Ages, and as always, see you in the next one.